National Assembly Speaker Thandi Modise has admitted that Parliament failed to act fast against state-captured claims. She spent the day being quizzed at the inquiry about Parliament's oversight role in allegations of undue influence by the Gupta brothers. For more on this, we're joined by the National Assembly Deputy Speaker, Tsenodi. Mr. Tsenodi, good evening, and thank you so much for your time tonight. Firstly, I'm just keen to know what your response or reaction was when, if in fact you watched the proceedings as Modise was giving her testimony, and what you made of, her admitting that Parliament had failed, and also the apology that she issued to South Africans.
Firstly, Kathy, incidentally, you were speaking about fires there earlier. And we got a message yesterday to sleep with one of our eyes open by the firefighters in the residences where we stay because of the fires around Cape Town. So the state, it was a way of speaking. We've always had one of our eyes open. And it is important that we accept that she did well by apologizing for where we went wrong. And in fact, the courts did so in coming to a conclusion that there are aspects of the work we were meant to do, we didn't do so well. But as we said, one of the things the courts did as well, after being taken to court by some of the MPs, some of the Speaker, the role of Parliament and its authority to manage its own affairs. And it created a platform upon which to learn on a regular basis, to do things differently. And this is the sort of trajectory we are on right now, if I may put it that way.
But if we're being truly honest, Tsenodi, Parliament wasn't blind to where it was falling short. In fact, the South African public consistently kept calling Parliament out because they were relying on Parliament to hold the executive to accountable on a number of scandals that unfolded during a particular time frame. And so the apology now, does it come because it's almost convenient to apologize now after the fact? This is after we've had the fire pull videos, after some MPs were ousted out of Parliament because they took a very strong view on these matters.
Kathy, I think let's accept that the Commission, in the first place, was one of the biggest public initiatives in the country to explore the nature of the problem that amounted to what is called state capture, an inquiry into the extent of that. It is looking at what has happened in the past to come to the conclusion that an apology is correct, because in certain respects we delayed doing certain things. We could have done it appropriately earlier on, but in the context of multi-party and internal party complexities, those decisions could not be made easily, although one of the biggest one that was made was, in fact, for as the State Commission itself here, for decisions to be made internal to the African National Congress, but they had implications in Parliament. For example, with the President having to resign. And that was unprecedented. It was as a result of these pressures, both internal to the party itself and the organizations that are aligned to it, including public issue with issues that were not going wrong. Mr. Mantashe told the Commission that that decision was made in certain respect from as far back as 2013, but its implementation did not happen as soon as we would have loved, but it did happen. And this is why, following the Commission, or during the Commission, the Speaker correctly on our collective behalf made that apology, and we accept it. That's the reasoning as to what we are saying as well.
Of course, part of the reason why I'm asking this question is that even today, South Africans would have the same expectations of Parliament to be able to hold the executive to account in the way that it was perhaps 3 or even 4 years ago. And so South Africans need to know that something has changed, that Parliament is indeed more vested in the interests of the people than the interests of the parties on whose ticket they're in that Parliament on.
Firstly, Kathy, you would have heard the extent to which this question was dealt with in the Commission itself. In other words, that we as presiding officers, for example, we depend on political parties to bring to Parliament members who will be in a position to represent them to their best of their ability. But those members, before they can take office, also may take an oath or affirm their commitment to the Constitution. And so if you do not bring a sufficient number of people with experience who are able to learn fast as well when they are new, because we have to accept that there will be a degree of continuity and necessary changes in the composition of those who will be brought in by political parties, especially in this instance of the majority party, that effect will be even more dramatic to them. But it also places a particular stress on presiding officers in leading Parliament by deepening the quality of induction, of capacity building on an ongoing basis, because the authority of Parliament through its communities is huge, through its committees is huge, and can make a huge difference. What you referred to of an earlier period is because there was sufficient number of senior people inside Parliament who had the authority and could be able to take on and undertake examination of issues, both practically but also in the interface with those in the leadership, in the form of ministers and deputy ministers. As the demographic changes, it's not just the people who are changing, it is also their age profile, that Parliament is becoming younger, the challenges of helping MPs across the political line to acquaint themselves with what Parliament does and has to do, and to what extent is an important part of the duty that we have undertaken, and we have been doing so. This first quarter, for example, of Parliament saw one of the critical areas of building the capacity of chairpersons so that they can communicate their work, the work of Parliament, but also their interaction with the executive during meetings that are held with them, both in private but also in public, so that there is never an opportunity where people do not know where things are at. And that thing needs to be built in the manner in which MPs and their leadership in those committees understand and have the necessary skills to undertake properly.
Mr. Tenodi, are we likely to see Parliament move to a point where, even where it comes to ministers who are managing different portfolios, where Parliament actually fully assesses what ministers have been able to deliver on and what they haven't been able to deliver on, and send a report to the President about the performance of ministers, at least from the view of Parliament?
Well, Kathy, in the first place, Parliament does this assessment. The Money Bills and Related Matters Act requires that committees following the tabling of a budget undertake an assessment of the work of each department and its ministry, and then to write what is referred to appropriately budget review recommendation report, which contains areas that have been done well and areas that needs to be relooked and reviewed and appropriate action be taken. And that piece of legislation does not only make recommendations, that goes to the ultimately the the Speaker refers them to each of the appropriate ministers, and therefore who act on behalf of the President. Also, it contains the possibility to amend that budget if Parliament feels that in this area, in this particular department, things have not been done appropriately, and therefore changes that are effected by Parliament will be necessary to bring about those changes. There's no question that where the President, as the Commission head, who agrees and comes regularly, and almost every time he is in Parliament, or he has to respond to 24 questions and supplementary questions. And the supplementary questions, he doesn't know in advance. He hears them in the House so that he responds to them. And many of the issues that he has to respond to are issues that MPs from various political parties have with what he is responsible for and is supervising, but essentially comes from the work of departments that are carrying out that function.
Of course, the only difficulty with the processes that you've outlined, including the committees, is that oftentimes they fall along party lines and not necessarily along what is wrong and what is right, or even if the individual in question has to respond to certain issues. Sometimes they're protected by those that are part of their constituency or part of their parties.
In the nature of politics, Kathy, there will be instances where people do that. But there is sufficient grounds where MPs have agreed across the board. Even in one of I've often referred to a session that I chaired in Parliament, and I gave MPs 10 minutes to go and confer their whips to confer about matters that they had problems with. They came back after 7 hours. That meeting went on to the early hours of the morning. Even at those times, people were able to agree unanimously across party divisions on critical issues. So we must point that out as well, that yes, there will be those instances.
The big question, of course, Mr. Tsanodi, is whether Parliament is going to be able to move to a point where the interests of the people are put above the interests of the party. That is really the big question.
Well, you would have heard the Speaker and the Chair together telling the Commission that the people are at the center of what Parliament needs to do. This is why, in addition to holding the executive to account, public engagement, the involvement of people in the affairs of Parliament, via, amongst others, not only the work of committees themselves, when they go to areas where people live, and or allow them to participate in what is being decided, but also the NCOP, through its regular programs, takes Parliament to the people. In opportunities where those who are not well-heeled are unable to fly over and travel to central places, whether it be in Cape Town for the National Parliament or in provincial capitals, that they go to places where they can air their views. They are in queues to speak and communicate their views. What we are hoping will increasingly happen is that the views of people will be reported back to how they have been taken on board in the decision that has been taken. That's the quality of improvement we need to do. And this is why we have said that the sector oversight model, the legislative sector as a whole, a model for holding the executive to account, works only if there is effective people engagement in those decisions. Right. And the systems that we must bring about, including of improving infrastructure in the country, so that people, wherever they are, whether they are students for their educational purposes or people for their small business operations, have access to infrastructure that should spread in the rural and semi-rural areas including peri-urban areas,
Mr.
for their
Zenodi, we're going to have
effective
to leave
engagement.
it there for tonight. Unfortunately, thank you so much for coming on to the show, the National Assembly Deputy Speaker, Lechisa Zenodi.